This is a Jmix exclusive.
As everybody knows by now, the story kind of broke on Friday. Friday is a slow news day. Everybody has heard by now that Suge Knight's fiance, toi-lin Kelly, was just sentenced to 3 years for a probation violation tied to Suge Knight's case. Now, I had a report in December after toi-lin Kelly's dad had passed away and she went to a funeral that she was rearrested. I kept that news on the low because I knew that she was going to appear before a court and I did not want to say anything regarding it. What's going on here is an earlier case that was linked to the selling of the Tams incident footage of Suge Knight in his truck with the death of Terry Carter. That footage was sold to TMZ. Now, as the district attorney's case kept getting weaker and weaker, they started throwing charges on top of Suge. They knew that Suge had a reasonable defense for the Tams case. And that reasonable defense would be self-defense. So what they did is they went after toi-lin Kelly for that video. Now, I have it on good merit that David Kenner was the one who wanted the Tams footage out there to try put the evidence out there so the public could see it. Try to, basically try the case in the court of public opinion. So as the prosecution, LA County prosecution, started to see their case crumble in front of them, we had Sloan say that he would not testify against Suge. We have video evidence that came out via TMZ that showed them picking a gun up off the assailant. Suge Knight has said repeatedly, or I've heard word through Suge Knight, that C-Bone Sloan was actually reaching in his truck to pull the keys out. And that is called a forcible felony. Now, in a situation of a forcible felony, carjacking being the forcible felony, you have the right, under the law, to defend yourself with lethal force. Suge Knight defended himself with lethal force. And I think the closer to the trial date, which has been put off for about 2.5 years now, but the closer to the trial date, the more that the prosecution realizes that their case is a very weak one at best. So what they did is they went after toi-lin Kelly initially last year for selling the footage of the Tams incident to TMZ. Now what they did when this happened is they issued a search warrant for her phone and her home. Now this sounds like common practice, but what that actually does is toi-lin Kelly was very instrumental in Suge Knight's defense. So when they issue a search warrant for toi-lin Kelly's phone and they issue a search warrant for toi-lin Kelly's house, it's called Incidental Collection. They happen to collect evidence from her phone and evidence of the defense via the search warrant. So when they arrest toi-lin Kelly for the TMZ video, they serve a search warrant and they get most of Suge Knight's defense because they got her phone and they searched her house. Now this is the first step in LA County really trying to bury Suge. And I've said for a very, very long time, there is a reason that they are doing this. And that reason is that Suge Knight knows where all the bodies are buried. Suge Knight employed off-duty cops. This is a fact. And some of those same cops today are lieutenants. These are top brass. Now, these being top brass, Suge's a very dangerous person. So the prosecutors are watching their case dissolve when it comes to Terry Carter and Suge Knight. So they go after toi-lin Kelly for the TMZ cell, and they execute a search warrant on her home and her phone. In the process of doing so, they incidentally collect information related to Suge Knight's defense. So they charge toi-lin Kelly. They hold her on, I believe it was $1 million bail. She finally made a plea agreement later last year. And what that agreement was 5 years probation, no contact with Suge. Come to find out, when Suge Knight did the recording for the Death Row Chronicles and they aired that teaser.
To set the record straight is like this. I'm not a monster. I'm not this really bad person who don't care about nobody. I mean, I care about my artists. I treat them like family. To be able to get people that come from nothing to give him something. That was the most important thing to me.
It allowed the court to once again serve search warrants on producers of Death Row Chronicles, toi-lin Kelly, and the attorneys involved in Suge's case. So they rearrest toi-lin Kelly on a probation violation. And toi-lin Kelly does not have a clean record, but it's not, a horrible record whatsoever. But so just months after toi-lin Kelly strikes a plea deal to avoid, prison, she's rearrested, and she was sentenced last Friday to 3 years in jail for the probation violation. Now the question here is, or the statement is, that apparently none of the prosecution want Suge to have any outside help. It's very apparent by the arresting of toi-lin Kelly, because toi-lin Kelly, being Suge Knight's fiance, is his outside communication. And what I've been told by a personal source was the communication that toi-lin Kelly was having after the fact, after her probation sentence, was to get Suge another attorney. Now notice that on the 27th of January, both of his attorneys, Matthew Fletcher and Thaddeus Culpepper, were arrested for allegedly trying to bribe witnesses in the murder case. And they were charged with acting as accessories after the fact, which is a felony. So it's notable to say that in the 2.5 years that Suge Knight has been in jail, they have denied him common rights that we would all have in the same circumstances. You have the right to confront witnesses. You have the right to hire an attorney. You have the right to consult with an attorney. You have a right to hire your own personal investigators for your case. They denied Suge all these rights.
I'm not trying to be a lawyer, but I got paperwork to indicate a lot of stuff that haven't been done even since a year ago. And then last time, one time we was here before, and I was trying to do the subpoena for the check. And you said I was allowed to. And when you told me that, it's been 7 months.
Are you giving this to Mr. Wilson?
Yes, I am, but I mean, sometime I can't get through his. Only person I'm able to call is him, and sometimes his office don't take my calls. And I have other counsels that I'm trying to deal with. I don't know where he's at today, but David Kenner and Fletcher. And Matt Fletcher back there also, Your Honor. And I'm doing all the right procedures, as you said. I respect you and I respect your court. So I listen to you, and I tell everybody to go through Judge Ryan. They go to Judge Ryan, they still don't get approved. And how could I can't have one attorney for trial. I'm not trying to miss my trial date. I don't want to slow my trial date down. I know I can't, I don't want to. And I would just like to be able to talk to counsel so I can be prepared, and everything I'm doing. I got some paperwork right here. You know,
the only thing that I said, my hands are tied on this one. The only thing it says, you can have Mr. Fletcher, you can have Mr. Canada go to see Judge Ryan.
They have done that, sir.
There's nothing I can do about this.
I know, but if you keep turning them down, not allow me to see them, and the stuff's not like subpoenas, like stuff's not getting done with the chick. I have some paperwork out here. I'm not trying to be an attorney, but if you read it, it's stuff that's dated.
I can't read it. It's not my business. Give it to Mr. Wesson and let him read it.
And as their case grew weaker and weaker with Suge Knight on the Tams incident, they started going after the people close to Suge Knight, mainly toi-lin Kelly. Now, once they served the initial search warrant on toi-lin Kelly that brought these charges, they incidentally collected information from her phone and house that had to do with Suge Knight's defense. Now, yes, they served the search warrant on toi-lin Kelly to see if she sold the Tams footage, but incidentally, when you serve a search warrant on someone's phone, you get all their information. So whatever communications that Suge was having via an attorney through toi-lin Kelly, LA County prosecutors are now aware of. Now, I've been told that Suge Knight was using other inmates' personal PIN numbers to make private calls, and that's how he called Death Row Chronicles. They've also put a snitch into a adjoining cell of Suge Knight's to try to gather more information on Suge Knight's case. That kind of backfired in their face a little bit. But if you look at it from this point of view, they're denying Suge visitation with his own family. They have denied Suge visitation with his own fiancee and child. They have denied Suge right to his attorney, right to an investigator, and they have denied Suge any and all communications with anybody other than one attorney at a time. Now, usually in cases like this, and we have multiple cases against Suge Knight, we have the Tams incident, we have the robbery incident with Cat Williams that Cat Williams already pled out to. We have the threatening of F. Gary Gray incident. And now we have the incident concerning his attorneys and toi-lin Kelly. Now, Los Angeles County would have you believe that Suge Knight is this big, bad John Gotti. Now, if anybody, I know there's a lot of people out there that don't support Suge Knight, I want to ask you a question. What is the difference between Suge Knight and Tommy Mottola? They both produce music. They're both head honchos. Suge Knight has never been convicted of any murder. Suge Knight has not been under investigation for any murder. But yet Suge Knight is being treated like he's John Gotti. Notice the same treatment is not given to other music executives. And like a source told me previously, Puffy had better be on his tiptoes, because it looks like the statement that Los Angeles Police Department and Los Angeles County in general is making is if they want to shut you down, if they want to put you down and they want to put you in prison, they absolutely will. Now, the reason that I'm doing this video is to point out that there's many cases here of the prosecutors initially charging him with a crime, having their case fall apart in front of them, but tapping more cases and throwing more charges against Suge so he's underwater. Because it's one thing to be able to have a good defense on the Tams case, which was self-defense. But when your defense is thwarted by search warrants for toi-lin Kelly's phone, who was in contact with his attorneys, and search warrants on his attorney's phone, that means that they're violating Suge's right to private counsel. Now, LA County does not have the right to listen in on Suge Knight's conversations with his attorney. If Suge Knight is making phone calls via his attorney, LA County has no right to listen to those. They are violating his civil rights. Now, a lot of people are going to say, well, who cares? It's Suge Knight. The problem is the precedent that it sets. If they can do this to Suge Knight, then in 3 years when it's someone else, if it's a Russell Simmons or it's a Tommy Mottola or it's a Sean Puffy Combs, they're going to use this case as a legal precedent in order to do this to other people. And that's why you should care. Now, with the Me Too movement and events like that that are happening, you know, there's a lot of people that are friendly with Suge Knight that are not going to stand up publicly for Suge Knight. Because, I mean, he has a checkered past, a history with women, just like Dr. Dre. So he's not getting a lot of public support. You don't hear Al Sharpton talking about Suge Knight. And there is a reason for this. The media has painted Suge Knight to be a big bad wolf or a bad guy. And that's what they want you to believe. But if you go back to the crimes that Suge Knight has actually been convicted of, he's nowhere near close to the John Gotti type of personality that they're making him out to be. Now, one would ask themselves, why would the court do this? Why would the court go so far out of their way to silence Suge Knight? And I have an opinion on that. It's one thing if you are a free person and you're on the streets and you make a statement. Your statement is taken as somewhat credible. But if you've been convicted of multiple felonies and you're sitting in jail and you make a statement, most of the public are not going to believe that your statement is credible. Because just like Greg Kading does, he'll say, well, you know, it's a jailhouse informant. So as long as they can keep the term jailhouse informant on Suge Knight, the longer they can suppress what he has to say and make it less credible in a public forum. And there's another angle to this. The prosecutors, defense attorneys, including people like Thaddeus Culpepper, whose nickname was the Groupie, they stand a lot to gain just by being involved in this trial. Think of it like the OJ case. If the prosecutors on the Suge Knight case are successful in putting Suge Knight, the most notorious record label owner, in prison, here comes their book deals, here comes their fame. So everybody from the prosecution to the judge to the court reporter down to his defense team stand to gain from Suge Knight whether he wins or loses. If he wins, they stand to gain their 15 minutes of fame. If he loses, they stand to gain their 15 minutes of fame. Now I want to address Thaddeus Culpepper. Thaddeus Culpepper's nickname was the Groupie, because what Thaddeus Culpepper would like to do is talk to multiple media outlets. He was breaking, in my opinion, attorney-client privilege by doing so. He was talking to Jesse at Controversy Radio. He was talking to Russell Poole and Michael Carlin. He was making statements for his client without his client being present or maybe even aware of some of these statements. So, when it comes to Thaddeus Culpepper or Matthew Fletcher, we don't know if those statements were being made on behalf of Suge Knight or not. We just know that they were charged with accessory to murder after the fact. So what I think everybody needs to keep in mind is if they can do this to a Suge Knight, they can do this to anybody. And I want to really look at Suge Knight's criminal history. He is a 2-time felon. So they've leveled several felonies on top of Suge. If he gets one more felony, he's going away for life. So Suge Knight right now is fighting for his life. And LA County court system is doing everything it can to impede his defense. I think it's fair by seeing the TAMS footage that Suge Knight has a reasonable self-defense claim. Terry Carter was his friend. Notice Cat Williams, who's been arrested multiple times. He settled his robbery case when it came to the paparazzi taking pictures of him and Suge Knight's son was actually taking a leak in an alley. And that's why Suge Knight and Cat Williams attacked the reporter and allegedly took their camera. Notice Cat Williams, he didn't even get jail time for that. Suge, on the other hand, those charges are still pending. So you have the prosecution that know that the TAMS footage of the Terry Carter incident, Suge Knight has a reasonable defense. Once the prosecution realizes that, then they started going after media outlets. You'll notice TMZ, they posted the TAMS footage. I've been told that the attorneys wanted that out there so the public could see it. Did they prosecute TMZ? No. They prosecuted toi-lin Kelly for selling them that footage, which was a part of a deal that she made, allegedly, with TMZ to sell the footage. But notice they didn't go after TMZ. They only went after toi-lin Kelly. Now, when it comes to the Death Row Chronicles and Suge Knight breaking a no-contact order by speaking publicly on the Death Row Chronicles, they did serve a search warrant for producers of Death Row Chronicles phones. But notice, those people are not standing in court. It's toi-lin Kelly that got 3 years. And now it's Suge Knight's attorneys that he was very limited in speaking with are both facing felonies. So the weaker that the TAMS case got, the more charges they tried to retroactively add against Suge. F. Gary Gray was not even a story until the middle of last year. And then all of a sudden, well, okay, the case is breaking down with the death of Terry Carter, so we're going to hit you with threatening F. Gary Gray. And we're going to go after your fiance for selling this footage. And then we're going to go after your lawyers for coercion or threatening witnesses, when it is a lawyer's job to reach out to witnesses, even if they're witnesses for the prosecution, to try to see if they're going to cooperate or not. I think that this is a complete travesty of justice. And the reason that I want to bring public attention to it is because if we let this happen without saying anything, 5 years down the road, it could be you sitting in the same position. It could be me sitting in the same position. If I speak out against the LAPD and they find a charge on me, they can limit all my contact, limit my right to an investigator, limit my rights to my attorney, take away my support system from the outside, jail them, arrest my attorneys. This is unprecedented. This has never happened in the public forum. But because it's Suge Knight, because they can label him as a big bad wolf, and because with his history, nobody's going to stand up for Suge Knight. Suge Knight is friends with more celebrities than Puff Daddy. He has support out there. But you have other people like Whack 100 coming out saying he's going to bail out Suge, and you had Floyd Mayweather saying he's going to bail out Suge. And what they're doing is they're using Suge Knight as publicity. They're using him as free publicity. Because like I said earlier, when it comes to the prosecutors, when it comes to his defense attorneys, they're all in this for their 15 minutes of fame. It makes no difference to them whether or not Suge Knight goes to jail for all charges. Because either way, they're going to get their book deals, they're going to get their television deals, and they're going to be able to tell the story of Death Row Records. Now, you have a lot of people on the outside, I brought up WAC 100, that would stand to gain a lot if Suge Knight wasn't free. Because then they can be the public voice of Death Row Records and Death Row history. You see Reggie Wright Jr., he's now the public voice of the Death Row Chronicles, when we all know it should be Suge Knight because it was his record label. So the point of this video is to let the public know that there is an orchestrated plot to strip Suge Knight of his civil rights, to use positions of power, as of being a lawyer or a prosecutor on the case, to their own benefit for their own 15 minutes of fame. And in the meanwhile, innocent bystanders like toi-lin Kelly are going to jail for 3 years on a 5-year probation violation. Now, if that was to happen anywhere else outside of LA County, we're talking about a 6-month turnaround, but not for her. And like I said previously as well, the robbery case with the paparazzi that Cat Williams had already settled long ago with no jail time is still hanging over Suge's head. And the reason that they are doing this is because they know that the Tams case is very weak. So ask yourself where the black leaders are. Ask yourself where the Al Sharptons of the world are. Ask yourself where the Ben Crumps are. What's happening to Suge Knight is setting a dangerous legal precedent, which means once that this happens, when they go to do it to someone else and they cry foul, they can point right back to what happened with Suge Knight and say, yeah, we can do that, and here's why. Here's the legal precedent. What is happening to Suge Knight is unfair, and what is happening to Suge Knight is motivated behind two things. The prosecutors and the defense team want their 15 minutes of fame. The prosecution would rather have Suge Knight in prison so his words carry less weight. I think we can all agree that Suge Knight is probably not the best person in the world. I think we can all agree that Suge Knight is also probably not the nicest person in the world. But I think it's funny that months after the One Oak shooting, where he was shot 6 times, and it's alleged that an off-duty LA County Sheriff's Department officer let the shooter in the back door. Less than 6 months after that, he's attacked again. Obviously, they want to silence Suge, and if they can't do it on the streets, they're going to do it in a court of law. And in the process, they're going to violate his civil rights, and they're going to use this case in the future to violate other people's. And it's almost genius, because they know that there's not many people that are going to stand up publicly for Suge Knight because of the way the media has portrayed him. So without any public support from either friends or famous attorneys or civil rights leaders, they can pretty much do whatever they want to Suge Knight. And unfortunately, his son Legend is now without his father and his mother for the next 1.5 years minimum to 3 years. For what? A phone call? Why wasn't TMZ prosecuted for buying the video of the Tams incident when toi-lin Kelly was prosecuted for selling it? Why wasn't anyone from the Death Row Chronicles prosecuted for breaking an order, a court order, but yet toi-lin Kelly was? These are just questions that I have. And no, Suge Knight is not a saint. Suge Knight is not he's not a choir boy. But that shouldn't matter. We have due process of law. And due process dictates that you have the right to an investigator, you have the right to an attorney, you have the right to sit with counsel and speak to counsel, and you have the right to not have your phone calls monitored when you're speaking to your attorneys. And that's exactly what's happening with Suge Knight. Listen, if you believe in karma, that's fine, but this is not the way karma works. If we don't have faith in our justice system, no matter if it's a Suge Knight, then it's not justice. Look what they're doing to Russell Simmons. Look what they're doing to Bill Cosby. It seems every powerful, and I'm not trying to make this about race, but every powerful black man they're trying to tear down right now. Suge Knight being the easiest target because he has had the most press. Bill Cosby was the most wholesome black icon of the 80s through the 90s. He was the first person to go out there and show positive representation of a black family unit. And the media has done nothing but smear his name with unfounded allegations. None of this has been proven. The first and most successful black-owned record label was Death Row Records. And they're taking Suge down a peg now. Now look what they're doing to Russell Simmons. This is conditioning, people. What they're doing is they're conditioning you. It's a form of racism without being overtly racist. Because what they're saying is, no matter how successful you are, no matter how much good or bad that you've done, if you get too big, or you say something we don't like, or you go against the grain, we will put our boot on your neck. That is what's happening here. With Cosby, it's not about justice. It's about tarnishing his name. It's about putting him down. And I'm seeing an unforgivable pattern here. First it's Cosby, then it's Suge. Now it's Russell Simmons. You see what's happening? And we got a lot of people protesting things that are arguable. This is not arguable. Everybody should care about what they're doing to Suge Knight right now. And not because you like Suge Knight. You should care because they're setting a dangerous precedent that means that they could do this to anybody. All I ask for when it comes to Suge Knight is that he has a right to talk to his attorneys without being surveilled. He has a right to prepare his defense without search warrants being executed, which gets all his defense information, and that he deserves a fair trial. He deserves, just like any one of us, if we got arrested, he deserves to be able to talk to his family, talk to his kids, and talk to as many attorneys as he can afford to hire. And hire any investigator he can afford to hire. And the courts are not allowing this. Look, I'm not going to say our justice system is not flawed. Okay? But it's the best in the world. We have the best justice system in the world. And if we let this happen, see, this is the thing. This is the conditioning that they're doing. This is the divide and conquer tactic. If we let this happen as a people, as a country, as a whole, if we let this happen, that allows them to do it to anybody. We have to use our voices and stand up and say, you know what, not this time. I understand that justice has its pros and cons, and it's not blind. I know that. But we have to hold these people to the same standards that they are holding us. If I can't break the law, if I drive down the 405 freeway at 100 miles an hour, I'm going to probably get arrested for dangerous driving or reckless driving. Okay? If a police officer does it, nobody blinks an eye. The law should be equal. And what the court is doing to Suge Knight is a travesty. And they are conditioning everybody who doesn't care about a Suge Knight for them to be able to do it again to somebody else in the future. And mark my words when I say this, that if this is allowed to happen, they'll do it again. That's the thing about power. Once you give an inch, they take a mile. Once you let them bar attorneys, bar visitation, bar adequate medical treatment to one person, no matter if you like them or not, that means they can start doing it to other people. And next time it might be a celebrity that you're sympathetic to. So that's why it's most important to stand up to when it's a celebrity that you might not be sympathetic to. Terry Carter was Suge Knight's best friend. He set up that meeting that day. Terry Carter had nothing to do with what happened to Suge Knight. It's unfortunate that Terry Carter was killed in that incident. But there's no way that they can convince a jury in Los Angeles County that Suge Knight intentionally killed his best friend when someone was trying to carjack him with a gun on them. And the prosecution knows this, so they are pulling out every stop they can to throw so many felonies on Suge. F. Gary Gray case, the paparazzi robbery case, to make him plead out. But the problem is that as with Suge being a 2-time felon, if he pleads to any one of those felonies, that's life. They are trying to put so much pressure on him that he either takes a deal or cooperates. And they are doing it illegally. And I think that's really the end point of the video that I'm going to make. Toi-lin Kelly's not a criminal. When has it been criminal to want to help out your fiancé when he's fighting for his life? Unless toi-lin Kelly's going out there putting guns in people's faces saying you better not testify. How is a phone call illegal? How is trying to get Suge Knight an attorney illegal? The only answer I can give you right now is to let your voice be heard. Nobody is talking about it. Nobody's picketing. Nobody's protesting. Nobody's going to the courthouse. Nobody's being vocal about it on social media. The only people that are being vocal about it are TMZ, who are making money off those stories, the LA Times, who are making money off those stories, and defense attorneys that want to be the next Johnny Cochran. Thaddeus Culpepper's nickname was the Groupie. He was talking to all these media outlets, telling media outlets what they wanted to hear. So when the Suge's trial was over, Thaddeus Culpepper already had an in with the media, so he could work on his own book deal, he could work on his own press, and that's what's happening. But I can't sit idly at the sidelines and watch what's happening to Suge Knight while I'm screaming justice for Tupac, because there's no justice for Suge. He's got a hard battle. He's facing what? 4 or 5 felonies? Why are they trying to shut him up? And does it have to do with the off-duty police officers that were working for Death Row Records, and now some of those cops are still LAPD? And the only thing that's happened to Suge is the attempts on his life. That night in Vegas was an attempt on his life. The One Oak Club shooting was an attempt on his life. The Tams incident was an attempt on his life. He was also even shot at a club in Miami in 2005. How many attempts on this guy's life are going to happen before people start to ask why? Well, because he bullies people? You guys are smarter than that. I mean, if you look at the history of what's going on with this guy, it's pretty apparent that someone wants him dead. And then you look at what the prosecution is doing and the courts in LA County are doing to Suge, and it's almost 100% that if they can't, it's like Suge Knight said, and it's my famous little quote: if they can't take the money away from you, they take you away from the money. And I believe it's the same with the truth. If they can't shut you up publicly, they'll shut you down privately.
This is a Jmix exclusive.
What up, shut up?